started talking about like his vampires conquering all series in Rise of Dracula, and this led to an artificial intelligence conversation. And I'm like, why are we
Hmm.
doing this off the air? Let's just go on the air because it's
Yeah,
actually
let's bring
interesting.
this out to people. Why not?
Well, hey, well, you've been on my show before. We'll just go anywhere and everywhere. That's part of the fun,
Yeah,
right? So,
it just goes.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
where it goes, where it goes.
yeah, exactly. And then we end back with you promoting the show, which is always the best way to do something like this, right?
Yep.
So we're talking about AI, and like I said, the idea of like the cool thing about Reign of Dracula is it talks about the fact that humans are no longer the apex predator anymore.
Hmm.
It's vampires, and I've only had time to read issue 1, but issue 1 was very much to the victor goes the spoils. Because
Hmm.
that's just the nature of conquest. It's the victors get to do whatever the heck they want, and everybody else
Hmm.
has to pay for it. So this led to artificial intelligence because we're talking about like the apex predators of the planet. And again, you look at what DARPA is making right now. You look at what some of the other things are making right now. I don't think AI is necessarily the end all be all evil thing, but I'd be lying to you by me saying I was looking at some of the things I saw and said, I don't know if we should make this. I'm not
Yeah.
entirely sure it's a good idea that we're doing this. And I think there is something to be, because the one thing we've said off the air, and I'm just going to repeat this on the air, AI's big advantage over us is not necessarily what it can physically do. It's the fact that from a mental standpoint, a speed standpoint, they can dedicate almost any and all their time to mastering one thing. We don't
Hmm.
have that ability in the world because we have too many things else we have to do. We
Right.
have the ability to master stuff, but even if we put all our dedication, concentration, and focus, it takes us, if we have that kind of intensity, about 2 years to do it. They can
Hmm.
do that in a matter of weeks,
Absolutely.
and that's their
And
big
it
advantage.
learns.
Yeah,
It
right?
it learns and it grows. Yeah, AI is a very terrifying concept. I mean, it's been a terrifying concept in science fiction literature for for decades. It's something that in that scientists and engineers, they're all afraid of, but for some reason we're still just doggedly pursuing it. And I honestly don't know if it's a good idea. It may mirror a lot of the things that we see in Rise of Dracula, where humans are replaced as the apex predators on the planet. And then how do we adjust to that? How do we adjust to having to have subservience to this new creation? There's a lot of, as a horror writer, I see a lot of potential for mining that concept for new stories. It's just going to continue to give you story ideas for forever.
I love that. Okay, like going back to our youth, Star Trek: The Next Generation explored both ends of that spectrum actually, which I
Hmm.
think was
Yep.
really interesting. Like Commander Data is like in many ways superior to the average human being. He has limitations
Absolutely.
too. I mean, they again, but his ability. There is one episode where he literally took over the ship by himself.
Hmm.
He was able to
Yeah.
do it quickly, efficiently, and it took him a matter of hours. He had complete control,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Just because someone put off the phone. On the flip side, on the flip side, I one of my favorite Star Trek of all time is The Measure of a Man, where Jay is put on trial whether he's alive or not. That is such a
Hmm.
fascinating look. And I actually do ultimately think like this: how AI and us go forward in about 20 years, when AI has caught up to the point where it's going to have its own feelings, its own actions. It's
Right.
how we treat it,
Hmm. And one of
right?
the
We
concepts
treat
that's
it
always
as a life
interested
form of
me, one of the things that's always interested me about AI and data is an example of this. From our human perspective, we always perceive that the weakness of an artificial intelligence is that it can't experience human feelings. I've always thought, why wouldn't that be a strength? Because humans, sometimes often our feelings and our emotions, they prevent us from achieving. They prevent us from doing things that would benefit because we let that whole morality, that those social mores, our emotional attachment to things, we allow that to get in the way. But an AI. if they can't experience feelings, they can just look at it in a very cold, logical way. And this is an obstacle. Get through, get over, or destroy the obstacle without being weighed down by humanity. So, what if humanity is actually the weakness of artificial intelligence?
See, I have an interesting counterbalance. So I'm gonna bring up something as simple as salt. You ever seen sea salt under a microscope?
No, actually,
Have you ever done that?
no.
Okay, so when you look at salt, like you compare iodized salt to sea salt, right? Iodized salt's perfect. It's got square, perfect, and like it is functionally speaking, it's
Hmm.
clean, precise. Now if you look at sea salt, it's got these little black flecks. It's got these little imperfections in the sea salt,
Hmm.
right? But here's the thing. Now between the two salts, for us specifically, the sea salt's healthier, and it's
Hmm.
because of those imperfections
Right.
it has. Right, and one of the things like, this is one of those those realizations I've had. Well, I think the answer to that question is it's going to depend on the nature of how a machine adapts and changes. Our
Hmm.
flaws, like individually, also are the sources of our strengths, because those things, they tend to mirror each other, right? I am a loquacious big mouth. It's one of my skills, right? At the same time, right? The upside of that is I can have a conversation with anybody, which gives
Hmm.
me a huge advantage when I go out into the world. If I want to sell something, if I want to convey an idea, communicate an idea. Consequently, I may not know when to shut up. But because of my inability to know to shut up, I'm actually really good at what I do. Our
Right.
flaws sometimes give us language, brings the strength. And in those flaws, also, there gives us an ability to grow and evolve. So I think the question there isn't whether humanity's strength and weakness. I think our humanity gives us the ability to evolve, not just social norms, but our emotions, feelings.
Hmm.
It gives we have the ability to go one or two ways. Now, what we listen to, I think, is now that's a different story. Now that's a different conversation. But the ability to change and grow, it has as much to do with our human condition as it does, right? Our imperfections opened the door to change, ironically enough. It's also a strength, not just a
Hmm.
weakness. So the question then with a machine, now it's like, again, now a machine in cyberspace, or wherever like Skynet is, right, quote unquote,
Yeah.
that machine can grow infinitely. But the moment you bring the machine into the physical world, how does it change? How does it grow? How does it
Hmm.
evolve? Right?
Right.
It still could do it. It still could do it. I'm not saying it can't. I'm not saying like I would not be. I'm not going to be that simplistic to think that a machine, and it would evolve differently than what we would be. But I
Hmm.
don't. So I think it goes both. But I think the question we'd have to understand as a human being is, how does a machine evolve? How does a machine learn? What is their
Hmm.
language? Does that make sense?
Of course, absolutely. Yeah. And it's that there's just so many ways you can handle a story about artificial
Hmm.
intelligence. And,
Yeah.
an entire smorgasbord of different ideas, out there,
Hmm.
everything from surrogates to the Matrix to, there's so many
Terminator.
concepts.
Yeah.
Terminator. Oh yeah. Terminator's the absolute, you know, gold standard of AI movies, I think. So it's definitely a fun concept to mine. And yeah, again, it mirrors a lot of the concepts that I play with in Rise of Dracula.
Yeah. So like vampires and robots do have something in common.
Hmm.
You're creating it, but again, vampires typically have their own weaknesses too. And although they're
Hmm.
far more complex, the older the essentially, which is
Hmm.
what makes them interesting too. It's their
Right.
evolution of how they see the human condition around them, right?
Hmm.
I think it becomes they become more predator. It's more of a predator prey relationship, right? So
Hmm.
I mean, which makes a really interesting question about vampires is: are vampires evil, or are they
Hmm.
just simply following their nature?
Exactly. And that's definitely that's a common theme that appears in vampire literature, the good versus evil. And then as we've matured, it's become more of exploring that moral ambiguity. And what I wanted to do with Rise of Dracula was I wanted to completely eliminate that expected trope. It's not really a
Mhm.
story about the battle of good versus evil. The vampires are not necessarily evil. I mean, Lucy, when you get a little further into the book around actually, I think it's in issue 2, where she has this conversation with Arthur about, she's like, look around. When you came here, did you pass any homeless people? Do you hear any sirens, gunshots, anything right now? And Arthur's forced to admit, no, all of those things are. And she's like, yeah, we took care of all that. We rounded up all the homeless people. They were sent to the farms. We've crushed all of the criminal elements. We've swept poverty away. And the only thing we had to trade for it is humans have to live like cattle and know that they're going to be eaten eventually. So, is that evil, or does that save the planet? I mean, it eliminates pollution, it eliminates poverty, it eliminates sickness and homelessness and violence and crime and all of these plagues that we just have accepted and we deal with because they're such complex problems, again, because our human emotions and our human feelings get in the way. And vampires, they come in and they're like, no, we don't have these emotions. We don't have this emotional connection to these people. So round them up. If they're useful, we use them. If they're not, we eat them. And it was really fun to explore that, and not look more at the moral ambiguity and the cold logic of a predator that doesn't really care, why you're doing something. It doesn't care about your history. It doesn't care about your life story. It just comes in and says, you're productive. You get to live. You're not productive. We're going to eat you. And so we can play in some themes as well, from the way capitalism looks at labor. So I loved being able to kind of layer all of those themes in Rise. Rise is definitely a heavier read than Cult. Cult was more of a straightforward origin story, but by the time you get to Rise, there's a lot of layers to the story, and you can find different purposes and different meanings from it the more you read it. I mean, hell, even I wrote it, and I go back and I'm like, oh wow, I didn't realize I said that. That's a pretty clever, insight.
It's like, I am so smart. SMRT. Right, right there.
I'm so
That little
smart,
moment
I
of,
tricked myself.
that's right. Right. Hey, listen, you have to treat it. Listen, you gotta take yourself. I'm writing Alice in Wonderland as Greek myth right now. Alice is Pandora.
Hmm.
So I'm writing
Yeah,
the concept
love it.
of journey from dream to reality. Right. Writing that concept. So somewhere along the way, I'm not going to spoil it too much because I'm still writing it. But one of the things is I realized what the story is actually really about, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. I am either smarter than I thought, or I'm just lucky.
Yep. I
I'm
wonder
okay.
that all the time.
It's cool. Um, it's one of those things you realize, and it's like you have a lot more inside you when you're telling stories. I'm of the belief too that when we write something, we put a lot of ourselves into. There are things we don't even realize we're putting into it, right?
Hmm.
And it's things that resonated with us and touch us. Um, One of the I think through listening to you, I mean just we'll go back to the vampire thing, but there's one of these things I've gotten just listening to you. Not only this conversation, but our first one is you care very much about how people treat each other.
Hmm.
And I think, and the reason I say that is because the interesting thing about the vampires, the interesting thing when you talk about AI is you get the sense that they'd be fair, right? You get that sense.
Hmm.
Now, I don't necessarily think fair is a good thing all the time because
Right.
I don't know about you. I don't know about you. I mean, the fact that life's unfair gives you all kinds of second chances, and then especially a guy like me, I'll be honest, considering the fuck ups I've done in my life, I'm glad life's unfair,
Right.
right? But that doesn't change the fact that, like, I mean, even last year, how we were treating, how we treat people toward the end of last year, how we're still struggling with things in inequality and justice and fairness, and in the sense of compassion and empathy, right?
Hmm.
There are parts of our nature that has been, I would say, the last 3 years, there is a definite, I think, issue we have with how we treat each other and the cruelty the cruelty we can display to each other,
Oh, absolutely.
um, especially in the face of fear. And I think one of the things, well, the two biggest things I learned from the pandemic were, first, don't fall in love with an idea. Because the moment you buy an idea, no, that sounds dumb, but I sit there and think, what I mean by that is, if I'm detached from the outcome of my ideas, I can change my mind quicker. If
Hmm.
I'm so sore, if I'm so embedded in an idea, I'm a sucker. I realize, like, that's how
Yep.
human beings can be suckered. That it's all about the ideas you buy into,
Right.
and so I'm trying to now. I'm certainly not perfect at this, but I try to be detached from all outcomes. The second thing I learned is it doesn't really matter what party, what leader, what thing. There's no integrity in our leadership anymore. And I think a lot of our disparities going on right now has to do with the fact that there is no integrity or transparency from top to bottom.
Hmm.
And you can see that, and going back to, like, your story, something from the outside coming in would get rid of all that bullshit.
Hmm.
Like that part of it would actually be refreshing in some ways, right?
Yeah,
I
it's that
mean,
we have to have something to rally against together. That out. I mean, like, World War II brought the nation together.
yeah,
People forget we were a fairly divided nation prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor. You know, there were a significant. Actually, I think the majority of Americans wanted to stay out of World War II,
yeah,
and we were pulled off into our own concerns, and we were very divided. But then we had this outside force, this evil from the Pacific Ocean. It comes in, and when it affects us, it's like, oh, within a couple of days, the whole nation united, and people were signing up to join the military, and we're ready to go fight. So yeah, having that outside force kind of bring humanity together. And we do play with that in Rise of Dracula. But we also, what I don't like to make anything super simple. So, we are so polarized and divided at this time, even in the face of this literally world ending evil or world ending force, evil from the perspective of humanity. We still can't get over ourselves to unite and come together. Even the people they're both fighting the vampires. They both have an interest in overcoming the movement that the cult of Dracula has become. They can't unite and fight together because they're each fighting for their own purposes. So yeah, there's a lot of exploration in the book about just humans and the flaws of humanity in general, our biases, our personal bullshit, for lack of a better term. It divides us. It makes us weak. It makes us unable to do the things that we need to do to literally save our species.
do you look up by any chance Native Americans when Columbus and then all the movement came in, because that was their thing. If they
Oh,
had
absolutely.
united at
Yeah.
an earlier state, yeah, if they had united at an earlier state of it, I'm not saying we wouldn't have settled here, but it would look a lot different than it does today,
Oh, absolutely. If
right?
we
It would
could
look,
have, if we could have fought, or if we would have had to have faced one united Native American country or empire, we would not have been able to break them apart and overthrow them as easily as we were, with 20 something separate tribes to defeat.
yes,
So yeah, that's I am. I know you can tell by looking at me, but my grandmother was Cherokee, lived on a reservation and everything. So yes,
okay,
that history is definitely it definitely influences the way I
yeah.
write. Looking at it from those different perspectives. But yeah, like you look at my father, you can definitely see it. I mean, he's dark skinned, high
No, it's
cheekbones, dark
fair.
hair, all that. But me, I mean, I'm blonde hair,
So
blue eyed. Can't tell.
Just as an aside, just like so I understand, because in Canada, what we do, we have like people with that we call them Métis. Are you technically that? Like, is that what you would be considered? I don't. I'm
Say
I'm
the say
thinking
that
that's
term again.
different.
I'm not sure what you said.
Métis, Métis,
Métis.
METIS. So in Canada,
I,
in Canada, so when the English and French settled and they married into
mhm,
native tribes,
mhm.
the half native, half English, right? We call them
Oh,
Métis
okay.
up here.
Yeah, it would be about
Yeah,
the same thing. Yeah. So yeah, that same concept there. Yeah.
yeah. No, it's an aside. I have a buddy who's Métis, English, half like half
Hmm.
native. So like, yeah, I get it. But you use the world differently because again, historically speaking, you saw the end of one regime on North America and the start of another one, and you're kind of like the bridge between them, honestly.
Yeah, in a
So
way. Yeah.
you can see it's like, yeah, because there's two ways. There's two ways to look at it. Like when you have an enemy that overwhelmingly strong, right? The people who get rid of their biases the quickest,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
And if you can't,
Yeah, those that
and if
assimilate.
and yeah, because you have no choice. You have to be able to trust the people you're fighting with. Like this is an old chain of command thing. You're trusting everybody else with yourself. If you
Hmm.
can't do that, there's no chain of command. There's no chain of command, especially if the force is bigger and stronger than you. You're just fucked.
Hmm. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And yeah, there's and again, this isn't a new concept, but we do use it, we do deal with it in Rise of
No.
Dracula. You know, the people there are people like the Vichy French in Nazi Germany or in France after the Nazis overthrew the government. In Rise of Dracula, there are people that are just like, I'm better off if I just work with the vampires. If I just
Oh
throw my lot in with them, and people will do what they have to do to survive. It's a human concept.
yeah. Yeah. No, it totally is. And the other thing too, it also depends. Like if your own kind mistreats you, and the other
Hmm.
side's like, we'll just treat you fairly, you'll take
Hmm.
that deal.
Yeah,
You'll
even
take
if
it
the
because
end result is they're going to eat you.
wait,
You know,
well, that's the
you're
thing. They may not eat all of you. Well, that's the other
right,
thing is they may not eat all of you, right?
right.
Because because again, if you're the vampires, you're right. The people that make these, you're going a little nicer in general because it's easier in the long run to pacify everybody else,
Hmm. Yeah, it's a
right?
very
It's
Roman
easier, right? It's
concept.
easier, right?
The Romans
Yeah.
they didn't conquer areas and just wipe out the cultures. They found it was much easier to just go in, provide a new government, provide new infrastructure, and then assimilate all of the local customs, the local traditions, the local religions into Roman culture. And they were very successful at building a
Yeah.
massive empire that way. We deal
Because
with
it's
stuff like that in Rise of Dracula. Rise is a very political story, but not in the way that we would define it today. It's not right versus left. It's just political philosophies and how you conquer and subjugate the population.
so. Are you saying you made the modern version of the phrase?
Oh, you broke up just a little bit right there. I didn't hear that question. I'm sorry.
No. Yeah, it's coming back. No, it's okay. It's okay. So basically, you created your own version of the Prince by Machiavelli.
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
Did you
That
hear
was
that?
yeah, I did. Yeah. Machiavelli is someone I've studied quite a lot, especially in writing this story. He was very pragmatic and he had an understanding of an honest understanding of how humans function. He didn't see
Mm-hmm.
humanity colored through these rose-colored glasses. He saw humans for what they were, and he was able to exploit our own nature and our own behavior. And again, just like the vampires do in Rise of Dracula, they use humans against
Mm-hmm.
humans.
So, are you sure you're a horror story? I'm gonna put it to you like this. Cause you got no. I'm gonna put it to you like this because what I like it almost sounds like you're crossing into I look at some like epic fantasies. We're talking like Brandon Sanderson. We're talking
Oh
Matt
yeah.
Rothfuss. We're talking some of those big guys. You're definitely playing in that field. Like
Well,
whether you
you know,
realize it or not, you
yeah,
yeah.
it's natural. You know, I read all of those books growing up, and others in that same vibe. And you know, we're influenced very heavily by the things that we consume, and then you know, when we write, when we create things, we do pull those things in. So it's the way I like to describe it. So if you read Cult of Dracula, if you look at Cult as a Toby Hooper Southern Gothic Texas Chainsaw Massacre type story, it's a small group of people in this, you know, this remote Appalachian area in this small church. So that was Cult. By the time we get to Cult, or by the time we get to Rise, that Cult has become a movement. And the book becomes more of a John Carpenter near future dystopia. So it's a different kind of horror. You know, we pull in that those dystopian ideas, and you know, in some ways, it might dance up to the line of science fiction, as dystopian stories often do. But still, it's definitely a horror story. It's just a different type of horror story than Cult. And when we get to Rise, which
Okay.
is the third and final volume, it's a different kind of horror all over again. This is a post-apocalyptic story when we get to Reign of Dracula. You know, it's full on George Miller, Mad Max. The world is fucked.
I'm getting like decline and fall of Roman Empire vibes for the
Yeah.
last series.
Oh,
Is what
you
I'm getting,
are.
right?
Yeah, you'll see.
Because
Yeah, a lot of Roman history. I researched a lot of Roman history while writing Reign
yeah,
of Dracula.
no, because it makes sense. Rome conquered the world. If you
Mhm.
look at it from in terms of how long they were able to do it, it goes back to what you
Mhm.
said. We're not going to change the day to day. We don't really care. If the
No.
money is all going to us, who cares how it
Right.
works? Nobody's
We're going to
going
give
to
you
care either,
sewers.
right?
We're going to give you roads. We're going to give you trade routes. We're going to give you jobs. We're going to give you food. And, you know, but you continue worshiping the gods that you worship. And you know what? We're even going to take your religious holidays and your sacred days, and we're going to incorporate them into our religion. And we're going to come up with things like Christmas and Easter, and everybody's going to celebrate your holidays. Just join us, you know, and that's what made Rome so influential, and why we still much of our culture today is still we owe a lot of it to the Roman Empire. And so, yeah, I think it's difficult
I
to argue that the Roman Empire is not the greatest empire in the history of humanity.
At least what we know. Like I said, because once you go past Rome, it gets a little dicey of what data we have. Like that's the thing about history is we
Hmm.
can only have pieces. But the pieces we have in Rome, super impressive. Like you have this
Which
ability to
again
look
is
at they did
why
well.
Rome was so powerful, because all of those other empires, they
Yeah.
may have been huge, they may have been great, they may have done all these things, but we don't know about them. So that tells me that Rome was more successful because we remember Rome, and we're thousands of years away from
See,
the height of the Roman Empire.
I, I do. Egypt's just. And I'll give you, and I'll tell you a reason, kind of why I would say Egypt. Because have you ever noticed the memes and stuff? And they did a comparison of Egyptian hieroglyphics to our memes
Hmm.
today. It
Yeah.
is scaringly similar. It's like
That is funny.
it's,
Yeah.
no, it's scaringly similar, right? It's very much like and Egypt, although again, its its downfall was its inability to change very
Hmm.
quickly. But it's also why it lasted as long as it did, thousands of years. The Egyptians. Now, was it as big as Rome? No. Rome was the manufacturing genius. But if you're looking at longevity and stability as your requirements, the Egyptians might have been better,
Yeah,
right?
but
In the
here's
Western,
something
you
I'll
go
blow
east.
your mind with this thought. Much of what
Yeah,
we know about the Egyptian Empire comes from Roman history,
From Rome.
what the Romans wrote about it.
Yes.
So again, we wouldn't know very much about Egyptian history if it weren't for the Romans. So
Hey, like I said, listening to me, I have a lot of respect for the Roman Empire too. I do. It's like one of those things. Like you have to give the. I would actually go so far to argue with you. Here's the thing: if we're gonna go just strictly from the concept of statues built, the United States is actually a modern Greece and Rome.
Yes, absolutely. We're a reincarnation of Rome. Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
even Rome on steroids. I don't know, because we we dropped bombs
I think
that eliminated people in a flash. So yeah, maybe
yeah.
there's a
No.
lot of comparisons.
Well, I think they were stabler. I think they were just stabler. I think for them they were stabler. I don't know if the United States, as we know it, is going to be around in 20 years. I have doubts. Let's just say I have doubts.
Sure.
All right. But it's one of those things where no, like I look at I kind of look at the idea that we are the United States is a Christian culture. I looked at that. It's like I don't think you are. I think that's your trappings. But if we look at you, your statues are Greek or Roman.
Mm-hmm.
Your laws and constitutions, even the method of how you conquer other nations, is very Roman.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's very, very Roman. And I mean, the only big difference between the two is the United States doesn't have an empire in the physical sense Rome did.
Mm-hmm.
Rome did.
Sure.
From a financial standpoint, like where you see the trappings of empire in the United States is the financial.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's where you're the empire. Like you're the empire that constantly has to expand and feed.
Yep.
Because your financial system feels very much like an empire. But if you look at it from yes, there's bases all over the world, but there isn't a Caesar. There isn't the sense in the United States is just going out and conquering via not just brute force. They want your hamburger stands. They want Starbucks. Right. But I say it like that because that's like I look at if I look at the United States, I one of those little things when I was researching my Alice story because I was looking up. So if you know who the Statue of Liberty actually is in Greek, you know who one of my big bad guys is because I looked it up and I just looked at where the statue comes from and it's just like so the United States is Greek, Roman, and just a touch of the occult, right? In everything they do.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's what because the Statue of Liberty most people don't notice is actually inside of a 10-point star. If you look up the Gnostic meaning of that star, it's an impure thing. It's like, oh, interesting, right? And just the things you learn. So I almost laugh in some ways. People say it's a Christian cult. It's like, not really. Like if you really look at it, it's like, not really. I mean, it's a Greco-Roman with just a touch of pagan magic in it. That's the United States in a nutshell.
It's all about your perspective and point of view, which is, again, that's a topic that it was introduced in literally the very first issue of Cult of Dracula. Where you are when you see something is just as important as what you see. And that means you're going to see something and interpret it one way. I could see the same thing from my perspective and interpret it differently. And some guy over on the other side of the country could see it and interpret it a completely different way than either of us. So, we play with that moral ambiguity all through the Dracula series that I'm reading.
So I would go. So although obviously it's a little bit more black and white when you have a super predator thing. I think the cool thing about science fiction in general is it doesn't necessarily moral ambiguity or not. It's looking at a situation and assessing it from a bunch of different angles. Like classic science fiction and kind of like the old pre-1980 science fiction, right? Dealt with I have a moral dilemma, a human moral dilemma. If I do this thing, this will happen. If I do this thing, this will happen. And talking about what you said, like working with the vampire, guys are working again. morally speaking, we might be treated better with them than we were with our own people. What does that say
Oh yeah.
about us? On the other hand, right, the flip side is like, well, they're always going to feed on people regardless, and eventually everybody
Hmm.
capitulates. It might be some kind of random lottery system at the end of the day, but at the end of the day,
Hmm.
humans will always be fed upon,
Yeah.
right?
I can't wait until
And even
you read on and you get to the farms. We've talked about the farms in issue 1 of Rise of Dracula, but you actually get to see them starting in issue 3. And they were that concept was my favorite one to play with because, you think when you first see in Rise number 1, when you see all of these poor people, these homeless, these what they will later be called unproductives. Um, when you see them loaded onto these trucks, you're thinking, "Oh my God, they're being taken to concentration camps. It's going to be awful." And then when you finally see the
nope,
farm, it's not. These people, they're working together, they're farming the land, they're living, they have food, they
yeah,
have health care, they have education. But hey, there's this big barn over here, and when you go into the barn, you don't come out. So, it's so yes, there is that threat that eventually you're going to be, processed for food, but you do get a lot of really cool stuff in trade. So if you're a homeless person starving in the street, you're sick, you can't get healthcare treatment, what would you trade to have a roof over your head, food in your stomach, and treatment for whatever illness? I mean, would you accept the fact that somebody's going to eat you if they've agreed to take care of you for 10 years or so? It's what would you do to survive, and how would you survive? That's something we get to play with all throughout Rise.
yeah. And the answer to that, some
Hmm.
characters would go with it the whole way. Some
Yep.
characters would. I think this is one of the best aspects of human nature. Is this: we always strive for more. Now, a lot of people think that's just things. It's like, no, it's
Hmm.
not things. It's the possibilities of what we can become. We all
Hmm.
have a little bit of that in us. It's like, well, what if I do this? Like me, for example, I'm a freelancer. I make video ads for clients for like their works and themselves. I
Yeah.
write stories. I got my first comic being published soon. I did my first illustration credit not too long ago.
Nice.
I've grown as a person, right? Doing going
Hmm.
down this path for the last 2 years, and I don't want to go back. Like
Right.
this is just me being honest, right? I don't want to go back. Now,
Yeah, you're
I
made
may still
differently
work
than
a
that.
job. Yeah, exactly. So I'm exploring what I can do and who I can
Hmm.
become.
Right.
So I think so, and I've been also the guy nearly homeless and starving, so I know what that guy's thinking too,
Hmm.
right? If
Yeah.
he's like me, inevitably he's going to escape. He's going to be
Right.
grateful. Maybe he'll even put in some work for a time to pay off that debt in his head. But
Hmm.
inevitably speaking, he's going to try to escape.
Yeah,
Right?
and see,
Inevitably
that's the
speaking,
difference
right?
in the types of humans.
Yeah.
There are some of us.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a line from Bobby Kennedy. He said, "Some people see the world as it is and ask why. I choose to see the world as it might be and ask why not." And most humans look at the world as it is and ask why. Then there are very few of us who are willing to strike out on our own, to have new ideas and take the risk of achieving something great, but also accepting the fact that it's a strong likelihood that we will fail. It's like some people, my mother was one of these people. She was perfectly happy. Well, I won't say she's perfectly happy, but for her entire life, she punched a time clock at a factory. She worked there for 40 something years. She hated the job, hated everything about it, but she loved the stability and the predictability that it gave her. She didn't get rich, but she made enough to take care of a family. My father was the same way, worked in a sawmill for 20 something years, and now he works for the school system. Most people are W-2 people. They're happy to punch that time clock, do their job, get their pay, have a stable life. And then there are others who they're like, no, that's not good enough. I'm willing to risk it so that I might be able to achieve more. And, again, that's another concept that we explore in the book. The people who are willing to trade it all and just go work on the farm versus the people who are, want to strike out on their own, live in the wilderness and, try to make their own way and ultimately overthrow this greater power. So yeah, it's an exciting concept to contemplate.
Yeah, and I mean, also just on a personal side, like if and this also gives you an infinite place to play with. Because if you decide up the road, hey, it'd be really fun, an anthology.
Hmm.
Hey, right,
Right.
right, and because, well, no, it makes sense, right?
Hmm.
Look, you're like let's be honest, you're a businessman. You have a really
Hmm.
great idea here, right? You're gonna
Yeah.
naturally see how I mean, this like there is more. Like there is
Hmm.
more concept. The view is, well, where can I take this bad boy? What can I
Yeah.
do with it? Right?
Hmm.
Right? Maybe you'll come up with an obnoxious video game concept, like on a personal side. I think video games have more of a long-term value than a movie, but I
Hmm.
understand if you prefer the movie. I totally get it. This
Yeah.
is a personal-based thing, right? But maybe it's a video game for you. Maybe it's a board game. Maybe
Yeah.
it's a movie. Maybe it's a television show. Maybe it's an
Hmm.
obnoxious mug that says, "I joined the cult of Dracula and all I got was this stupid mug." Right? Right? Who knows? Right?
Yeah.
But the
There's so many
idea, but the
possibilities.
right? And you're a businessman, and even from a story standpoint, you're like, I told my big story.
Hmm.
There's so much room for these little stories here and
Oh
there.
yeah.
Now, and the thing is, like, although we're not talking about it this time, because I hope you want to come back for another time to talk about your next project,
Of course.
right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right. You're gonna do other things too. You're gonna want to, because it's like it's also
Hmm.
part. It's like, okay, I did this really cool idea with Dracula. Can I do something again with something else?
Hmm.
Personal challenge, personal growth, and even if it doesn't work out the way you want it to, you'll be like, well, you'll do a better Dracula story if and or when you get back to
Absolutely.
Dracula, right? So it's a win-win for you, no matter what
Hmm.
happens. So I look at it. So again, so strictly speaking, right? You setting all these ideas up now, in the long run, you have the potential to always go back and expand this
Hmm.
universe if that's what
Yep.
you want to do. So I do have a tendency to think maybe in this one sense you and I are a lot alike in the sense of like, you know what? I got a really cool idea. Let's see where
Yeah.
this goes.
Absolutely. I've never been afraid to try new things. I mean, I graduated college. I had $200 in my bank account and I said, I'm going to open a theater. So that was crazy. People looked at me like I'd grown three heads, like you're crazy. You can do that. You don't have any money. How are you going to buy a building? How are you going to do this? And I networked with a guy who owned a bar that had a stage for concerts. And I was like, hey, let me rent that stage from you, a couple of weekends a month from 7 until 10 p.m. And we started doing shows. And then after that, moved to a larger venue with a bigger stage. And then within 3 years, I opened up literally my own theater, had my own building, had my own bar, had my own stage. And then I got tired of it and I decided to start writing comic books. And so here I am writing comic books. But yeah, I've definitely got that entrepreneurial spirit. I've never looked at the world and seen limitations. I just see possibilities.
You're gonna like what I'm doing. So the next show is nearly a thousand episodes. So the next step for me is getting like the machine van kind of deal. So I have this. So my master
Yes,
plan to make money is ice cream. Right. My master plan to make money is ice cream and booze it together.
it works.
Because
I'm down
hey,
for it.
listen, Bailey's mint ice cream. You will love me. I promise. You will love. Like just put it
Oh,
together.
wow, that does
You would
sound
you.
good. Bailey's just mixes with stuff like that, right?
Yeah, it's perfect, right? See,
Yeah,
here's the
absolutely.
thing. This is why I know it works. Every person I've said this idea to says like, I'm in. But I'm
They're
in.
like,
If somebody showed up with
yeah,
yeah, exactly.
like I can do that.
That's why
Yeah,
I know this.
sounds great.
It's like you would pay $8 for an ice cream with booze in it.
Yes. Yes. Look, I'll PayPal you $8 right now. Send it to me. I want it.
Yeah. Nails and fix. So yeah,
Yep.
but the idea is to see my master goal of the show is to get a studio environment where I can give. I kind of want what Joe Rogan has, but maybe a little bit more obnoxious because it's me, right?
More
But
obnoxious than Joe Rogan. Wow, that's a challenge.
no, it's not. It's easy. Just be like again. It's easy. It's easy. You just again, it's gonna be a reflect. Okay, listen, we've only talked twice, but I
Yeah.
mean, just based on your observations of me, I'm a silly bastard, right?
Oh
I
yeah,
could
for
make it
sure.
fun,
Yeah.
right? I could make it fun. That's the ultimate end goal for me is I'm going to go on the road. I'm going to go in because I think it'd be really cool to meet someone like you in your own environment and just have a
Yeah.
talk and kind of do like a tour. And if you got ice cream and Bailey's out of the deal, I think you'd be like, this is going to like
I like this
you'd
guy.
be
Yeah.
like, yeah, exactly. And then next thing you know, just go around. I've been thinking about like I said, the entrepreneurial spirit for the next 10 years, like going back to the old days when people were really, really broke. You know what a lot of people used to do back in the 50s and 60s was they would do these drive up shops.
Yeah.
Right? And that's going to come back, I think, in the next 10 years. I think that's going to be a
Sure.
very because storefronts are so expensive right now.
Hmm.
Drive ups are cheap. So if you have a
Yeah.
good drive up concept, you can make a killing. And like I said, I came up with something obnoxiously silly. It's me, and it fits me well. So if I can pull that off,
Yeah.
I think I'd be good. Yeah, right?
That's the way an
Possibilities.
entrepreneur looks at the world. It's like find a need and look at something and say, huh, how could I do that differently and better?
Yeah,
And it's a fundamental human thing.
yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. So, I mean, in every way, that's why I think like not projecting ahead because you got another volume 3 to actually put out. But
Hmm.
I think the army that overthrows the Dracula will be nuts. So it's like me with ice cream and Bailey trucks. Because that's how you overthrow empires.
Maybe I'll have a character in the story that serves ice cream and Bailey's.
That would hey hey listen. If you do, I'll pop. Like seriously, I would be like yes. It's like hey Josh, like, just let me know if you do it. That's all. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, just a little
But
background
yeah,
thing,
no, yeah, exactly. Why not, right? Because
Why
that's the
not?
thing. Like life is filled with yeah. Life is filled with possibilities, and that's the wonderful
Absolutely.
thing. I mean, you're living proof. I mean,
Yeah.
your book is doing very well. I mean, your book's doing very well. I mean, especially in a time like this, you're a mainstream comic book that's not Batman or X-Men. Like, well, that's another topic for another day.
Right.
That's creating its own little audience all by itself. It's not on a Kickstarter. I
Hmm.
don't
Yeah.
think anyway, right?
No, no, no.
Right? You've created a nice little. Yeah,
We went straight to the publishing route. I love Kickstarter, and I may utilize Kickstarter as a tool in the future because producing a comic book is expensive as hell,
yes, it
especially
is.
when you're the writer and you own the IP. Because I'm the one who has to pay the artist and the colorist and the letterer and the cover artists, and they all want to be paid immediately. Like they give you the work, they want the money for it. But as a creator, I'm kind of like my own corporation here. I invest in these people and their labor, and I don't get to see the benefits of it for a year or 2 years later, after it's published. So I do like the fact with Kickstarter that you can, as a creator, you can get paid for your concept immediately by your audience. But I don't like the fact with Kickstarter, some people see it as the end all be all of their distribution process. And I think that limits their impact and their audience reach. So one of the trade-offs of working with a publisher is, yes, it takes me longer to get paid, but I reach more people. Because Kickstarter, you're going to be limited to the people that back your project. with being distributed by a publisher, your work gets solicited and gets put out into comic book stores and gets on Amazon. I mean, hell, my book is in Target now, which is mind blowing to me. So yeah, that's the difference in the way I see it. Choosing to go the traditional publisher route rather than a Kickstarter.
So this is what I've said on the show a few times. I don't think there's a right answer to publishing anymore. Like there really isn't.
Exactly.
I think
Nope.
there isn't anymore because okay, my Alice in Wonderland Greeks thing. I want to do a board game to go with it. It makes
that's
sense
cool.
for me to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it makes sense for me to go on Kickstarter. It makes total sense because, with all due respect to the publishers, most of them don't have the wherewithal or the reach to hit board game people.
It's because board games aren't profitable.
Kickstarter.
It's hard to make money on a board game.
It is. No, it really is. But when it hits, it really hits. It's one of those like
Oh,
it's
when
an
it
all
hits,
or
it
nothing
hits,
process. So
Yep.
yeah. No, like currently is Dice Throne. It's fantastic. That thing kicks all kinds of butt on Kickstarter. Like, it makes those $1 million like gold, like $10,000 gold break $1 million because it's a hit. And when you have that hit, it's great. But when you don't, like you said, publishers just don't necessarily have the wherewithal, and also it's not what they do. Like it's just not. So why would I approach a publisher for that? It makes no sense business-wise to do it. Now maybe my novel, and maybe my novel where I'm doing a race inside a star. Maybe I want to do a more traditional route there because that's something that a YA style story. I mean, there's definitely traditional publishing has its definite uses there, right? And definitely there's markets for that. So it's I think, and the other thing, the only thing I will just say about your I think publishing has become by its very nature niche, right? It just has because of publishing has decentralized, especially in comics. Like I think when Diamond I think in the long run this is a good thing. But when Diamond became no longer the exclusive retailer for it anymore, it has opened the door. Like I think comics at that point officially decentralized, and at that point it's just been now. So Kickstarter, you might only find 200 people, 300 people, right? But considering what a comic shop tends to promote anyway, it still might be better than your comic shop buyers. Now, in your case,
it could be.
Right. In your case in particular, you have a cool concept that people can relate to. You had a publisher that put some backing behind it, and maybe a little right place, right time, a little wherewithal on your end. You hit it, right? Boom, right? So it worked better for you. And by the way, and I say this like this is because I think now more than ever, the decision of I think every creator is going to have to do Kickstarter at some point, not just because of because we all have to recognize who we are as a creative, and figuring out where our audiences is now as much part of that journey as a creative than it was ever before. Because just because publishers may not be the answer for certain books, publisher may be the answer for certain books, and understanding. I think one of the things that's going to get better, I think, as the artist is now is we need to understand who our audiences are now more than ever.
Oh yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it absolutely does. You've got to know. I was actually having a conversation with Teenie Howard. She's a friend of mine. She's writing X-Men and Catwoman right now. And we were. What's that? I didn't hear you.
I love her scalp.
Oh yeah. Well, she's amazing. But we were having a conversation about how you have to be willing to go out and find your audience now. And it's a concept that used to it didn't exist in comic books. You threw it into previews and Diamond solicited it and people bought it or they didn't. But now, with social media, with Kickstarter, with all these avenues, podcasting, you can go out and you can find an audience for whatever you're producing. And that was what I did with Cult of Dracula. I completely skipped the line. I didn't put my dues in. I didn't go work in the mailroom. I didn't go and write backstories for Marvel or DC, because that's not the way to do it anymore. It used to be very gatekeepery, like you needed other people to break in. But today, if you've got an idea and if you got an idea that you believe in, you're the only person standing in your way from getting it out there. There are so many avenues that you can choose to get your stuff out. You just have to be willing to roll the dice, put the effort into it, and market it. So you're absolutely right about finding your audience, and Kickstarter, things like that, making it easier to connect people with ideas to people that want to consume those ideas.
Well, it's also recognizing what the Kickstarter audience is. The Kickstarter audience is a collector's audience. That's what they
Mhm.
are.
Yeah, I can
So
see that.
understand, right? Understand that, okay. And going back to Deed Silly Bastard, what obnoxious shit can I put into the book that people will be like, "Oh, this is gonna be cool to have." This shiny thing, right? Like,
Right.
right,
Yeah.
right. Because I mean, I think there are things there, like again, Kickstarter, like their avenue right now. I mean, that's one of the cool things about it is you get to see these create an audience. And by the way, oh, Rich disappeared, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully he comes right back. Hello, Richard. Hello. I'm still here. Give it a second here. I'm going to give it just a second here, see if he shows up. I'm here, and this has been a wonderful chat. And I'll wrap this up in just a second if he's not here. One sec. As I am loading my email real quickly here. Right. Is he coming back? Is he coming back? All right. Hold on a second here. We're going to give this another minute here, another second here, and then we're going to have him come in. I'm emailing him right now, seeing if he's going to come back in and say hi and wrap this bad boy up. The computer's dying. Hello. Looking at the email right now. Hold on a second, folks. We'll give it just a minute here, see what happens. Coming back. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been one of those things, been regular things. I'm hoping, like I said, for me personally, I'm hoping that the computer, I am having a new computer into the new year. So hopefully this doesn't become as common as a thing as it has been lately. Maybe this could be the internet where I'm at too. It's a possibility I have to accept. Yeah, give me a second here. It is off. And hold on a second here, Bruno. Okay. If you send it, I might be. A second here. Give me a second. Give me a sec. Okay, I'm back. I'm going to be doing something really simple here to wrap up the conversation. I'm going to go into StreamYard, folks, real quick here, and then I'll be right back. I'm just setting this up. I will be right back, ladies and gentlemen. We'll wrap this up. Will not be able to finish the interview. They are in the middle of the storm right now, so I'm just going to wrap up the interview real quick, just to have an official wrap up. It sucked because we were just getting to some really good stuff. Rich, if you want any information on Rich's current series called Dracula, definitely go ahead to his website, cultofdracula.com. And like I said, Rich is writing a phenomenal series right now. He has done some incredible things with the whole Dracula concept. The cult is now a movement. Reign of Dracula and Rise of Dracula is definitely a worthwhile thing to read based on what I've seen so far. Finally, folks, if you are interested in my work, give me a second here as I do this officially. I'm a trained professional, ladies and gentlemen. Trained professional or something to that effect. Advertising services, or you work for your project. If you are interested in being branded, this is my work, this is my project. Definitely check this out. And that would do it for this interview. Still ended a little sooner than I hoped for, but things happen. Tom Richard's ended. There's a storm in this area. So, Richard, thank you very much for this interview. You're welcome to come back anytime, and that will do it. Tomorrow night, I have the one and only band Siren tonight. So I dressed my Majesty on Thursday, Dustin Brunel on Friday, and a makeup interview for our wife Bensine on Saturday. So thanks everybody. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Stay inspired. Keep shining in the dark. And I'll see you next time.